This is the first video of several videos that I expect that I'm going to use to cover an assignment called Node, which is part of my server programming class. And here is the URL for the course website. There is a course schedule here. And I am in the process of developing this schedule of assignments. And today what I'm going to work on is this Node assignment. And this page is not done right now, so what I'll do is record this video and make notes to this page and make a record of what the steps are that comprise this assignment. So here's the overview statement, and which makes a statement about the purpose of the assignment, which is to learn how to write server-side logic of web applications in JavaScript using Node.js. And you can keep in mind when you think about it, what we're talking about is an execution environment. So your code runs inside of a Node.js execution environment. It's similar to like a Java program. Your Java code runs inside of a Java virtual machine, or the C# or .NET program runs inside the .NET virtual machine. So Node.js provides a virtual machine that your program runs inside of. So I refer to that as an execution environment. And so what we're going to do to get started is to write and test a simple web server that simply returns the string hello to connecting clients. And of course, any program that can make a TCP socket can connect to the server, but generally it's a browser that a user is using to connect to the server, although it can also be other types of software. All right, so the first thing to do is to install Node.js. And when you install Node.js, you also install NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. And the Node Package Manager is the software that that you use to install, to extend the Node.js execution environment by adding libraries of publicly available Node.js programs. Now these libraries are called modules because a module is an organizational unit that's a part of Node, and I'll call it just Node instead of Node.js in many cases, because that in fact is I think the original and formal name. So there's a Node, and it has there are files in which you write your programs, and these files contain what are called modules. And so that's a type of organization that gets imposed on your program, and it helps with it's similar to these module loaders like Require.js, for instance. It has a similar kind of structure to it. So that's something that I'll talk about a little bit, but you'll also probably need to read up on. And so we're going to start by creating this file called main.js. This will be the entry point of a program. And here we're importing a module that's built into Node that we don't need to install using the Node Package Manager. And the module name is HTTP. So we can install that module. And we use the require function. That's a global function that you can call from within any module. And when I say you can call from any module, you'll be writing a module. So you can, as far as I understand, when you're programming in Node, you have to place your code inside files which are modules. And Node will load your file and execute it. So your file has got code in it. When it's time to load your module, Node will load the file, parse it, and run the commands that are in there. And it also provides your code with certain global variables that are not part of JavaScript. So require is one sort of a global functions, also maybe variables as well, or objects. And require is one function that's not a part of the JavaScript language, but it's a part of the Node execution environment. So Node adds that function for you to call, and you call that in order to load other modules. And by loading another module, you pass the module name into it, and require returns a reference to an object, and that object is used to access the functionality that's in the module. So we'll be writing modules that call other modules that we write, of course, and also other modules that are provided through the Node environment. Now, HTTP is a built-in module, and we don't need to install it separately from Node, so we're going to load that. I also want to say that in this assignment, we will not be using the Node Package Manager, so we're going to write a web server without using any additional modules that don't already come with Node. In particular, there's a module called Express, and we're not going to be using Express and Connect. There's another module called Connect that Express is built on top of, and these are popular public modules that you could install through NPM, but we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be developing a web server from the core Node execution environment. All right, now before we get started, we're going to need to install Node.js. You'll certainly need to do that if you haven't already. So I think I have a link to the site right here. And you'll see the current version is 0.10.15. And my Node is already installed on my system, but it's an older version. So if I do node -- version, I see that my version is 10.4. So I'm going to want to install a newer version. And you might want to take a look at this. It shows where Node was installed. This is the path to Node and NPM. They also mention where NPM is installed. And then it says make sure that the bin folder that contains those two executables, you want to make sure they're in your path. And I'm just going to check on that, and I know they're in there, but just to show you how I do it. So I'm going into my home directory, and in the home directory, there's a file called .bash profile. If it's not there by default. You need to create it. This is a Macintosh environment. For Windows, this is done differently, of course, and but for Linux, this is done the same as in Mac. And you'll see in here that I do not have that in my path. So I didn't see it in my path. Let's see. But if I do, so I didn't add it to my path. It must be in my system path. In other words, this directory must be inside of the path that's given to me when my terminal program runs. So I'm just going to echo $path, that works in Windows as well. And it's probably in here. Let's see, it's in USR local bin. And if I just scan through here, it looks like it's going to come up. There it is right there. So these path elements are separated by semicolon. Those are that's the separator, the delimiter in this path variable. And when you type in a command on the prompt, the system will search through these folders that are listed in the path that find an executable by the name that you're entering as a command, not the command line. Anyway, that's that. Let's go back to here. Now let me run Node again with version command, and you'll see that that's now the current version. So there we have it. And by the way, npm is also installed. We can look at its version at 1.3.5, but once again, we will not be using that in this assignment. And let's stay on the site for a second. These are important. You'll need to check these. These are the API docs. And this is the place to go. This is where you're going to need to spend some time reading and referencing the docs. This link here goes into a page that documents the HTTP module, and these are the contents. It's all in one page. It's a bit hard to read and understand, I have to admit. The documentation it's neat, it's clean, but it's hard to it's a bit hard to read. And so what was I going to do? Oh yes, let's create a file. Now I'm working in my repository. And you'll see in here that I have a .git folder, and this is the repository that you'll be using. So if I do, like, for instance, git remote verbose, you'll see that I am retrieving this repository from this, as user CSUSBDT from this host, which is where we're going to be where I will be setting up the remote repositories to be used in this class. All right, so let's go ahead and create this main.js. And now we can just go ahead and use the console command that's a part of JavaScript, and I'll just say hello. So console is a predefined function, and we're just going to call log on that. And let's run it. So I go node main.js. So it just prints the line to the standard out. I don't need the JS, I can leave that out. It's just the module name is main. There it is, hello, node hello. All right, and now, well, let me give a brief lesson here. This is, I'll call it my mod for my module.js. And let's do console log hi from my mod. And so this, now we have two modules, two files, main and my mod. And in main, let's go ahead and import my mod. So I'm going to create a variable called my mod and set it to what require returns, and I pass in dot slash mymod. Now, is it require? I think that's what it is. That's it right there, require. Now notice for the built-in module HTTP, we don't have a dot slash there. This is for built-in modules or modules that are in the path that's used by the module loader. You don't need to prefix it. You don't need to give a fully specified path name. The NPM, or I'm sorry, Node will search through a set of locations to try to find named modules if you don't provide fully qualified. If you provide an unqualified module name like this. So when it's our own module, we need to tell Node how to find it. So here we're using dot to say look in our current folder and look for a module named mymod there. So we load this file, and this is hello from main. And then what we want to do is perhaps call mymod. Let's call a function on it. We'll call it say hi. We'll call it like that. Mymod say hi. Save that. Of course, that's not going to run because say hi is not defined for mymod. Let's see what happens. Node main. So it says say hi. It says object has no method say hi. What object are they talking about? They're talking about the mymod object. Mymod dot say hi doesn't exist. Mymod does not have a method named say hi. Now it's giving the stack trace here. And so we need to add that function. And the way to add it, we'll need a function. We'll call it, let's call it say hi. And you know what, I could have tried to run that. Let's do it like, and I'll do that later. See this, if we put the console command outside the function, I believe that log will run when the module is first loaded. Let's test that. So I'll say mymod has been loaded. Let's do that. So, you know, when we do require high mod, the system will load mymod and execute the commands that are inside of it. And there are essentially two commands. This one command, which is, or statements, not perhaps commands, but statements. This statement, it will run the statement, which calls a log on this console object. And then the second statement is to define a function called say hi. It doesn't run the function, it just calls it. It just defines it, creates a function called say hi. So we can call it any number of times. Now, that will not work. Let's see. All right, what's going on here? There we go. And I think what I'll do is, let's comment out that call to say hi and just require mymod. I believe it'll say that mymod has been loaded. That's what just by calling require causes that module to execute. And then after printing that, it will print hello from main. So it should print my mod has been loaded first, followed by printing hello from main. That's my hypothesis. I'm going to check that. And we've commented this out, say hi for now. There it is, see? The require statement loads and runs the module. And then we get to the log command inside main. So we got that right. Oops, sorry. Now, this will still fail to run. We added a function named say hi to my mod, but it's not ready to be called. It still says the object has no method say hi. So just by defining a function named say hi doesn't mean that it gets exposed to other modules. To expose it to this other module, there is an object that Node provides to our module that lets us expose or publish our internal variables and functions to other modules. So it's called exports, and we simply attach properties to the exports object. Let's attach that function, say hi. So say if in JavaScript functions are also objects, and the function name can be used just like an object reference, and we're going to set that object reference to a property on the exports object called say hi. Now, before this line, say hi did not exist, but JavaScript allows this statement because what it does is it creates a property. If the property is not there, it will create and define that property for you. So this is us creating a property called say hi and setting it equal to the reference to this object, which is a function. So this should, now what will happen is when main runs, it loads this module. So we'll say my mod has been loaded. First it'll say my mod has been loaded. And then it prints its own hi from main, prints its own log. And then it calls say hi on the module. And so the third thing that happens is that it says hi from my mod. And the second thing, so here it loads my mod and it prints the first logging statement, then it does this logging statement, which is the second thing that's printed, and then we call say hi, and that'll be the third item that gets printed. Let's see if that works. There it is, 1, 2, and 3. All right, so that's we're not going to use my mod. I'm going to delete that, and that's just an overview of what's going on there. But what we want to do is not require our own module, but to require this HTTP. And just to play around a little bit, let's go ahead and log something. And if we try to print this HTTP module, now we're going to need to change the name. Now, we could call it my mod, no problem, but I'm going to call it HTTP because it makes more sense. And if we just try to print it, I believe it's going to say, it'll say something like this. It'll say object, something like that. and saying that this thing that we're trying to print has some kind of a two-string method, and the two-string methods, the default implementation just prints an expression that looks like that, and I'm not going to explain that expression. Let's see, and I'm guessing. Oh, it doesn't. It prints a whole bunch of stuff. It prints, let's go ahead and do that again. Let's go ahead and do that again. So we can, it's not printing this, it does not print this. It prints some, looks like it prints a lots of information about that HTTP object. And let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we'll run that again. So it's node main, and I'm going to send that to a file called T. And now let's look at T, and you'll see it's got, this is the, I guess it's dumping what the object looks like. So it has a field called parsers, or an attribute property. I'll call it property. That's the right word. As a property called parsers. So it's an object. This is the beginning of the object right there. This opening brace. Then it has a field called parsers, and parsers is another object, and that object has a field or property called name, property called constructor, property called max, property called list. And here there's another property called status codes, and that's an object with these numeric properties, 100, 101, and so on. So these are HTTP status codes. Those are constants. And then it has another property called incoming message. And anyway, there's a lot to read here. Outgoing message, server response, agent, global agent. Well, let's look over here. And here is the, this is the status codes. See that? HTTP.status codes. This is status codes there. This is one of the properties of that HTTP module object, and you'll see it's documented here. And you would use this like this. You go HTTP. This is, and then dereference that or by using a dot operator, status codes, and then you use this array syntax, even though it's we're not accessing it like an array, we're accessing it like an object. And there it is. It says not found. Status codes 404 is not found. There it is right there. All right, so that's what that looks like. Let's get back in there. Now what we want to do is, I think what I'm going to do is, no, I'll just keep going. Let's take a look at the documentation together. This is the documentation of the module. And they have some kind of a stability rating. This is not their top rating. I think the top might be 4, which is frozen. And I believe, I'm not sure though. And then it shows the command to load the module. And it basically, it's a module that supports the HTTP protocol. And you have to deal with HTTP message headers. And these message headers are represented by objects that look something like this. Okay, each one of these properties in the object refers to a line in the message header. So there's the content length message header line, and here it's set to 123, 123 bytes. Content type of text plain, and the connection, which is keep alive, and so on. So, and keys are lowercase, values are not modified. And it says here that Node's HTTP API is very low level, and so we'll be using this low level API. The advantage there is that it gives us more control, and as students, it helps us to learn about what's going on when you use modules and packages that provide a high level access to the functionality of a web server. All right, so here we have the status codes property, and here's a function called create server. And this function returns a web server object. And that's in fact what we're going to do. Let's call this create server. And this is a request listener, by the way. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And we're not going to need this. So we're going to do create server. And we had to pass in a function, which is the request handler. This is the request handler. Let's go ahead and store a reference to that server. And the request handler is a function. That processes incoming requests. And so when we create the server doesn't know how to, the server object, the object that is returned by create server doesn't know what to do with incoming requests that come from browsers. It relies on us to do that, to construct a response and send it back. And so what we do when we call create server, we pass in a reference to the function that will be invoked for each incoming request. So every time we hit the server, right now we'll be printing this message. So let's take a look there. Let's see if that's the case. Of course, when we have the server object, it doesn't, the server, we need to also run it. But look, before we do that, let's see that, that we can actually run what we have. And it says request handler is not defined. REQ handler. Oh, sorry, this says, I didn't spell it out. So I'm going to spell it out here. Request handler, there we go. And now we'll run that. There we go. Of course, it says nothing. Right? It just, what happens when Node loads the module, it runs this, it loads HTTP, it sets this variable to the reference that is returned by the require function. Then Node defines this request handler function. Then it creates a server passing in this reference, and that's it. Then it terminates. There's nothing else to do. The program terminates. What we need to do is to start the server. And let's see, that's why this is a bit hard to understand. This returns a new web server object. And the request listener, which is right here, they call it request listener, not request handler. And so the request listener is a function that's added to the request event. I see. So that's, you know, with Node they have this event listener mechanism set up. So up here you'll notice it says that where is it? Up here somewhere. I don't see it actually. So there's let's see. This is HTTP server. Ah, here it is. Well, we call it create server. Create server returns an instance of this constructor. So HTTP, the module name, has a property called server, and that property is in fact a constructor. And when we call create server on the module, it creates an instance from this server constructor and returns that to us. So in fact, here, when we call create server, we're creating an instance of this server object, and it doesn't really explain that in the documentation. I think the documentation is hard to read, I have to say. And it also says that this server is it's an event emitter with the following events. So there's a request event, and the request event is handled by functions that take two arguments, a request and a response. And so this event is emitted each time that there is a request. It says request is an instance of HTTP incoming message. That's also another constructor. And response is an instance of HTTP server response. That's another constructor. So when the request event occurs, Node will call the request listeners up here, all the request listeners that are registered to be notified that a request has occurred. And those request listeners must be prepared to take these two arguments. The first argument is an instance of incoming message, and the second argument is an instance of server response. So this is our request listener, where in fact we need to add these two arguments. These are other events. This is a connection has terminated. I'm sorry, when a TCP stream is established, this is when the server closes, I say, and so on. Let's see. I hope I got this right. This is a request listener. Maybe I didn't quite get that right. So the request, no, I did get it right, because the request listener responds to these events, which we get the request and response object. And so one of these, every time this connection happens, this event will occur, and the listeners will be called. And let's see, these are all the events. Finally, here's a command on server called listen. once again, I find the documentation really, really tough. I mean, what is this server? Server here is an instance of this, or it's an instance, sorry, it's an instance of, yeah, it's an instance of this, which is created by calling that function. So this constructor with uppercase S server was used to create this lowercase s server object. And once we get that object, we have a function called listen, which tells us to listen onto this port and gives us all this other business. And let's see the callback. So this is the port number, and I believe the port number is optional. Well, here is this server.listen handle. So there's different ways of calling listen. This is what starts the server. It says, start listening for incoming connections from clients. This is where we give it a port number. And this tells it the host name. There's some, you know, there are different, an individual machine can have multiple host names. That's the name that it's known by through its network, to a network interface. That's the host name on the internet resolves to an IP address, and a machine can have multiple IP addresses, one for each of its physical network interfaces. Then we have this backlog. I'm not going to go into that. This is the callback. I'm not going to talk about that. Here are other ways to call listen. This is the listen for connections on the given path. This is a Unix socket server. I'm going to skip that. This is this looks like the handle as an object can be set to either a server or socket. We're not going to use that. So I think what we're going to end up doing is calling this one right here. Pass in the port number right there. So let's pass in. Let's do it like this. So we listen on port 5000. Let's see what happens when we run that. Notice we didn't return immediately. The program is running because this results in the creation of a process, an underlying thread that is that's blocking and it's waiting for incoming requests. So when we connect, let's see what happens. When we connect, I believe our request handler will run and will print this this message here. Let's take a look. So I'm going to test it. This is HTTP ://localhost 5000, and it could be anything. It doesn't matter. Just mainly we want to get to this host, the local host, and that port number 5000. So the rest of this doesn't matter. All right, let's take a look. Request handler called. So in fact, we got it figured out. I'm going to kill that. That's Control C. And now, so basically we start the server and it just starts processing incoming requests. Let's see if we can pull some information out of the request object. There must be something in there, something like URL, path, something like that. Let's see what we get there. So I'm going to, let's see if we can understand it from the documentation. So this, once again, what we're looking at is the arguments to this request listener, which looks like this. So the first argument, request, is an instance of HTTP incoming message. Let's look at the documentation for that. Here, I'll skip to it rather than searching for it. This is, well, the table of contents help a little bit more. This shows that this is a class, this is a function, an object, and this is the server response. And here is the class client request. That's the one we want. I'm sorry, incoming message. It's incoming message. It doesn't look right. I should be client request, not incoming message. What is the difference between these two things? Let's take a look. So it says here that request is an instance of incoming message. And I think that it's also these are all of the things that are on the response. This is HTTP dot request. This generates a request. This is function to generate a request, which we're not going to do, processing a request. This also generates a request. This agent class we're not going to worry about. And this is the class client request. This object is created internally and returned from HTTP request. This is what you get back when you call request. It's different from incoming message. So let's go ahead and look at incoming message. That's what we need. Here is incoming message. So we see there's an event called close, a single event. This message has a property HTTP version, message headers, message trailers. We can set a timeout on the message. There's the message method, and this is the message URL. In fact, that's what I'm accessing right here. So that's a property. Let's go ahead and print that. Let me clear this. Let's go ahead and hit that. So look, I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. That should be printed by the console. Let's take a look. So I'm going to go to here, and I'll issue that request. That's the URL, /123. So when it says URL, it's actually not this part. It doesn't include the host name and the port. It only includes /123 like that. So we can add a whole bunch of stuff. Keep sending in requests. So you see how that works? That's coming in like that. And then we have these other things like message headers. Let's dump the message headers. Let's see what happens there. Kill that. And this is the URL. These are the headers. Let's see what it dumps here. So it showed the headers, it shows them as a JavaScript object. These are the delimiters to show that object. This is in like a JSON format. The host, this is the host string. This is the browser told us to suggested that we keep the TCP connection alive. And this is the cache control. This is the browser telling us what type of objects it accepts. And this tells us what kind of encodings it'll take: gzip, deflate, SDCH, different kinds of compression routines that that help to reduce the amount of bandwidth that's used to send messages between the server and the browser. And this is the language preference here. I think it's English. All right, now what we want to do is in fact not print this log, but actually send a response. So we'll just do response. Somehow we need to send a response back. We need to. This is the object that represents the data coming in from the browser. This is the object that we can modify that gives us access to the message going back to the browser. This is the response object. And let's go ahead and take a look at that. Is it outgoing message? What did they call that thing? So here, when we have this server class, it's got, oh, let's look at the constructor. The constructor, I'm sorry, it's not a constructor, it's this factory method, create, not create client, just create server, pass in the request listener. And this request listener takes this form, and the response object is of type server response. Let's take a look at that server response class. Here it is, server response. So this is what we use. We use an instance of this class that Node creates for us to construct a response. And here we can write headers and so on. And let's take a look. Here's the write command, and we can use that right there. And if this method is called, so we're going to call write. We're going to write a chunk of data. So we're going to call write, and we're going to say hello, like that. And before we test it, let's do the hard work. That's easy to test. It's hard to read the documentation. So let's spend a little energy here and try to prepare to understand what it is that we're going to see. If this message is called and write head has not been called, in fact it has not been called, so it's perhaps typically write head is called first. Something like this. And we pass in something here. Typically, this is what, because we're constructing the response headers, so we use write head to specify the response headers. But if we, and this write is used to send out a chunk of data. In the body of the response message, if we don't write any headers before we start pumping out bytes that comprise the body, then the node's going to have to do something, fall back on some kind of a default. Let's take a look. So if write head has not been called, but we call write, it will switch don't know what it is, the server, will switch to implicit header mode and flush the implicit headers. So the implicit headers, the default headers. This sends a chunk of the response body. The method may be called multiple times to provide successive parts of the body. Chunk can be a string or a buffer. If chunk is a string, the second parameter specifies how to encode it into a byte stream. By default, the encoding is UTF-8, so that's good. That's the standard for the web. This is the raw HTTP body. It has nothing to do with higher level multi-part body encodings. And the first time that the write is called, it will send the buffered header information and the first body to the client. The second time it's called, Node assumes you're going to be streaming data and sends that separately. That is, the response is buffered up to the first chunk of body. And it returns true if the entire data was flushed successfully to the kernel buffer. Otherwise, it returns false. I see. So what we want to do here is, here there's an end function. This method signals to the server that all of the response, see this write method, by the way, is used to be called multiple times with a chunk of data each time. So you're streaming data to the server. And end is a method that signals to the server that all of the response headers and body have been sent. The server should consider the message complete. The method response end must be called on each response. We must call end. This tells the server that's the end of the message. Now, what arguments does end take? If the data is specified, it is equivalent to calling response write data encoding followed by response end. All right. So we can actually pass in data. So we can I'll leave it like this actually. Let's go ahead and write and then call end. I think what I'll do is just call it like this. Just send the whole thing out like that. Change my mind. How do I call right here? All right. I'm a little concerned. It's because write returns true or false. It returns true. It returns false if all or part of the data was queued in user memory. Drain will be emitted when the buffer is free again. What happens when we call end when the buffer is not drained? Probably we want to wait until we're notified that that it's been drained, but I'm not sure actually. And so in fact, probably it's okay. I'll go with this. And let's go ahead and run that. All right, should say something like hello. There it is. Here's our string. We're printing hello. Now, inside the browser, let's take a look at the headers. And here's our request. And the method is get. Let's look at the request headers. How do we look at that? Select this. And I'm in Chrome. You get this. In other browsers, you'll have to use a different tool. But what I want you to do is inspect the headers that the browser has is informing us about. And here, the request headers. This is the headers that the browser sent to our server. So if we print those headers, we'll be able to see those. Let's do that. So we can do that here. Let's go ahead and do console.log, and that's request.headers. I think you can do that, maybe not. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. I need to kill this and start it again. Let's see what happens. I send that in again. Yeah, these are the headers. Like, let's take a look at one of the headers. For instance, pragma, no cache, all right, just as an example. Let's look at the pragma, no cache. So if you go through the list, you'll see that these headers here are what's shown here. These are the headers that the browser sent to us. And the browser, we can see them from the browser side, we can see them from the server side. These are the headers that, down here, response headers. These are the headers that we sent to the browser. Okay, so remember that has to do with that chunking. So when we do write, we use a chunked encoding. And these are the implicit headers, the default headers. Notice there's nothing to do with the content type. And so that's something that we ought to include. So in fact, when we write the headers, we should pass in, this is content type, we should pass in a bunch of stuff, and this content type is text/plain, because we're not sending HTML, we're sending plain text. Let's see what the browser does with that. Now, by the way, oh, that did not work. Unexpected token. Let's see, it's a mistake here. This is, it should look like that. Now, we're basically setting all the headers in one shot. Now, it may overwrite the implicit headers, or it may keep the implicit headers and just append this header to it. I think that's what it does. Let's go ahead and try that again. And, oh, look here, it's got this view source. It didn't say anything. Why did that not write? So, write head, the content type is not indicated here. These are the response headers. Is this, let's see, I don't know what's going on there. Let's see what happens if this is write head. I'm going to take out this. Is that right? Content type is one of the headers. Let me check up here. Is there something to do with headers in here? And, oh yeah, I think they did some documentation on that. Where was it? They showed an example. Oh, write head. Oh, I'm not calling write head. We have to pass in the status code and our headers. All right, status code is 200. And this is 200. Oops, that's a mistake there. And following the status code is a reason phrase followed by the headers. And notice the reason phrase is optional, so I think I'll just leave that one out. There we go. And let's kill that. Clear. Also, I don't want to see all that. I commented that out. That's good. Run that again. Go ahead and run this experiment again. Now, we still don't see it. Oh, here it is. Content type, text plain. Got it.